All right, April 18th, 2025. My reading of basically it's 1 Samuel 27, 28, 29. And also we've got some sprinkling of Chronicles in there. Just it confirms it goes along with the times and dates, First Chronicles. And then we also have Psalm 56, all backing everything up. I guess my main takeaway here, first intriguing part, I guess, is that David spares Saul yet again. Saul is again chasing after David for no good reason. He's flipped out again, got in that bad headspace, or the tormenting spirit has tormented him. But David spares him. Says, I'm not going to do that. So that's a good thing. You have mercy on your enemies. Listen to the prompting. Our battles aren't with flesh and blood, it's with principalities, powers of this world. And David understood that. David understood and respected God's anointing and knew that God would take care of it when it needed to happen. So he spares Saul. And Saul again backs off because of it. Then we get David goes to the Philistines and hangs out there, and I'm not sure how to take that. I really don't. That doesn't seem like the right thing to do, to hang out with the Philistines. I was going to read some commentary on it, missed that one. I was too hung up in Saul consulting the medium and all that went on there. I think there's some legitimacy to some mediums, and I think this is a very special case with mediums, because I believe that mediums are usually consulting evil spirits, and that's where they're getting their information from. The spirit realm, they're able to make contact with evil spirits. That's why mediums are bad. That's why in Deuteronomy it says not to consult with mediums or anybody that consults with the dead, necromancers, those kind of things. So we know that's bad, but here God allowed Samuel to speak to Saul, and Samuel just reaffirmed everything that's he had told him before. He said, "Look, you're gonna die. Everything you screwed up, you messed up. The God is against you, and now you've done this, which is even worse. You're not trusting God. You're not believing His word. You're not following His word." And you're going to die. And another interesting phrase that I've stuck on is the fact that Samuel says, "Tomorrow you'll be with me." A lot of the readings that I've done is in the realm of the dead, and that could both be with in comfort. That'd be in Abraham's bosom, which Jesus talks about, and we see in Abraham's bosom, that's the believers, the good, they are in Abraham's bosom, and then the bad are in the tormented. This doesn't say that they're either way, they just says with Saul. So is that in the same place in Abraham's bosom or not? I've seen people make that judgment, and we can see the character of Saul throughout and where his mistakes have been made, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he hasn't, in this case, check the criteria, check the box with the annual sacrifices and confession. He still believed in God. He consulted God, but then he also didn't do right. He consulted mediums, and he didn't do what God told him to do. And we have all this stuff. Not that we have any room to talk. We're all Saul-like in a lot of different ways. If we're being honest with ourselves and with God and confessing, which we should be looking at this, should be looking for Saul characteristics in our own walk and everyday life. We can be deceived and we can be torn that way. So, with that in mind, I'm not making that judgment. I'm not saying that Saul went one way or the other. The word says he was with Samuel. I'm not judging where Samuel's at. I'm assuming based on his walk with the Lord and the things that... But again, we can't go by how the Lord uses a person as to where they are at. God used all kinds of people for all kinds of things for his own purpose in his own way. God can do that. That's not, just because they're used is not an indication of your understanding, your knowledge, your ability, even your following of God. Again, I'm not the judge. I know what the word says, what it takes, but in those days, the criteria was that you made certain sacrifices. Saul very well could have made certain sacrifices, but he screwed up a number of times, and God's face was surely against him in a lot of ways. God wouldn't talk to him there. He was rejecting him, but that was the physical. I believe it's in 2 Corinthians where Paul tells us that we should turn over a believer who is practicing practicing sins, that we turn that person over to the devil, that he might die to himself. There's an interpretation there, but anyway, that he may, in the day of judgment, come back to the Lord. That's what it says. So again, I'm not making that judgment call. All I know is the love of God is great, and that we should live a life a certain way because it's good for us. And if we don't, that it could lead us away from God and lead us away from the belief in God. I think that's a real thing. So we have to be careful how we live, and we're better off by living in a certain way and acting a certain way. So those were the things I kind of stuck on. But also, we get that whole thing with David and the Philistines and how he worked with the Philistines. And we see how God does not specifically say that God led the Philistines to reject David from fighting with them against Judah, against the Israelites. So was that God ordained, or was that kind of just the way it was? Again, I'm just not reading that into it. Interesting stuff. But God, the one thing about David is he always praised God. He always knew where his power was from. And that's the beauty of this reading ending in the psalm, that God takes care of those who honor him. And we will screw up. It's true. And we will pay for that. But better off if we can acknowledge God. Give thanks to God.